Welcome to Athlon U Big 12 Preview Edition. My name is Braden Gall, and you can get to me on the internet everywhere at Braden Gall.
And I'm Steven Lassen. You can also get to me everywhere on the internet, all of your favorite doom scrolling, rage scrolling apps of choice. You can also read all my work at athlonsports.com.
It's that time of year, Lasso. I know it's talking season out there for all these reporters and coaches and players all across the country, but for us, it is conference by conference preview time as we get ready for training camp to open up across this great and fruited land that we call America. College football's coming, man. Have you had any moments where you're like, oh, it's pretty close? I'm kind of excited.
Yes, actually, I have. It's funny. We spend so much time from the end of the season to May getting the magazine ready. So I'm just still in in-season mode. But there's been a couple moments the last couple weeks where it's like, okay, media days are starting. I'm not necessarily like, we're going to get a ton of news from them.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, after media days, that means players are reporting, and that means we're going to have actual practice, and that means the season's right here. So, yeah, like it's kind of setting in a little bit. I could use a few more weeks of off season, but I'm also ready for week one too.
I'm got the special tingles, Steven. I've got some twitches in the pantaloons that are taking place. I'm getting excited. I'm getting excited about it. It's coming sooner than we think. I've got a vacation as well, so I'm going to come back from vacation, and like NFL training camps are going to be open, which means college training camps are right behind, which means fantasy drafts are taking place. Buy your fantasy magazine now. Get your NFL magazine now as well. athlonsports.com. And that means college football is right around the corner on Labor Day weekend. Cannot wait. Huge slate of action. We're going to go conference by conference, of course, from here on for the next few weeks. We're going to dive into each conference. We're going to break down our rankings, any adjustments we have to those rankings, some of the coaching changes that took place, some of the players and units that we are most excited about. And in the Big 12, it truly is a complete crapshoot of guessing at what you think could happen. We'll give you our best assessment today on the show. If you are listening on a podcast app of choice, please write a review. Give us 5 stars. If you do not give us 5 stars, you are a
hater.
Better.
Okay.
Better. I like it.
I was practicing in front of the mirror last night.
so for some reason, I believe that. And of course, 5 stars. That's how people find us. So we do appreciate you that way. And if you're watching on the YouTube page, we do appreciate that as well. Thumbs up, notifications turned on. You can watch the show there. You can see all those big, beautiful, glistening helmets behind Steven Lassen. I don't see as many Big 12 units helmets behind you.
Dirty little secret. I think I actually meant to change those out. That must have been what I forgot this week to do. So we'll have to change that up.
I see Arizona State. I see BYU. I see a lot of former Pac-12 schools. Is that Colorado down there? I see
Colorado.
Oh,
here.
Nice. There's the Buffs. That's right. Go Dion. There we go. Anyway, if you
the Utes there,
go Utes, the Utes. There were 2 Utes. Make sure, of course, you subscribe to the YouTube page, and you can watch the show that way. If you always been there's some of you that have been listening to the show for over 10 years, and first of all, I love you. You're great. But if you've never watched us, you can do that now. Go check out the YouTube page. All right, so I want to start with a kind of a broad state of the union here for the Big 12. And last year, this is really remarkable, and I think it's lost in the shuffle, but we talk about it a lot, that it's just such a balanced, no idea from week to week what's going to happen in this league. 4 teams. Here's what I'm going to start with. Kansas State, who we're going to talk about as our preseason favorite to win the league, finished 8th last year, and they were pretty good. Because there were 4 teams at 7-2, 3 teams at 6-3, and Kansas State was not any of those 7 teams. And so if that alone, to me, sort of paints the picture of what this league is capable of being on a Saturday week in, week out basis.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sum it up. I think what was it? 9 teams had a chance to go to the Big 12 championship game going into week 14 last year. So I think while there may not be a national title contender here, I think week in and week out, there's a ton of parity. There's a ton of close games. There's going to be a ton of chaos. It's great to watch. It's like Big 12 always gets preferential treatment in the Lassen household on Saturday on all the screens because of all of the meaningful games. But, like I said, I don't think the fact there's a national championship contender, despite that lack of one, should not take away from what's going to be another entertaining season in the Big 12. And it is one of, I think, probably the hardest power conference to predict when we sit down and do the magazine.
On top of all of that, the two most tenured and established, and you could call successful coaches in the entire conference were a combined 2-16 in the league last year.
I mean, pretty stunning, right? Considering both of those coaches and both of those teams were predicted to finish near the top of the Big 12, kind of getting at the parity, kind of crazy week in and week out things we have talked about. I mean, Utah's offense totally collapsed. Everything about Oklahoma State totally collapsed. You know, is there going to be a second kind of third act for some of these for these two coaches, Kyle Whittingham and Mike Gundy? I also think both of those coaches, I know we'll get into these teams, but they're kind of on different tracks going into the season because Kyle Whittingham already has the head coach in waiting with Morgan Scalley. Mike Gundy's potentially fighting for his job.
Yeah.
And the expectation levels are totally different. So just getting at sort of the structure when Kansas, Utah, Oklahoma State, your favorites in the preseason, none of those teams make a bowl. It sort of further illustrates where this conference is right now, week to week chaos.
Not a ton coming out of Big 12 media days either. Obviously, Brett Yormark kind of doubling down on the 5-11 model, which you could argue is not necessarily beneficial for the Big 12. So props and credit to the Big 12 for saying we think this is what's best for college football. That's a shot at you, Big 10, for wanting to continue this automatic bid charade that you're pushing on all of us out here in America. But speaking of coaching changes, let's start with the two teams that have two new coaches. And they're old coaches, not only old coaches in general, but old coaches at their schools. So a very unique situation, or just a unique one, as our former podcast host and boss would say. Very unique, redundant.
Sometimes you need that extra emphasis, even if it's not correct, right?
Grammatically, yes. And not the kicker for Kansas State. West Virginia is number 14 in our rankings. Arizona is number 15 in our rankings. And UCF is number 16 in our rankings. We will cover all 16 teams today on the show. But West Virginia comes back with Rich Rod. Of course, Scott Frost returns to UCF, picked dead last in our magazine. And then Arizona, Brett Brennan falling off a map, could be fighting for his job this year. So let's hit these first three first to kind of get to sort of cover the two new coaches. So here's a theory I have, and I may explore this with you on future episodes, in particular around all the different conferences where these come up. But I think there is some evidence in college football's modern portal roster management era that a rebuild can happen quickly. If you look at Mike Elko taking over for David Cutcliffe, I think they went from 3 wins to 9 wins at Duke before he went to A&M. You can look at Kalen DeBoer taking over at Washington. Jimmy Lake 4-8, although he wasn't there for all 12 of those games. 4-8 immediately. I think they won 10 games. Look at Kurt Signetti last year at Indiana, 11 wins after a team bottomed out under Tom Allen. And so there is evidence that you can go quickly. And I'm not talking about coaches that are fired for non-football reasons, right? I'm talking about football programs that were bad. Players were bad, records were bad, stats were bad. That's not necessarily the case for West Virginia. They got to a bowl game last year. They were 5-4 in the league. They won 5 conference games last year. Neil Brown maybe wasn't the right answer. But if you're looking at those 3 programs I just mentioned, and there are other examples of this, where a coach takes over a program that has bottomed out and quickly got them to competitive football, I would say West Virginia is way ahead of where Duke and Washington and Indiana were in this sort of rebuild process. And I think I know there's a lot personnel wise you're about to get to on West Virginia. I just think this is worth noting for both UCF, West Virginia, maybe even Purdue for that matter. We'll get to them. But I think it can be done quickly, even for a really bad roster and program. And I think West Virginia was actually better than that last year.
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons for that. You mentioned Indiana, and I think that is sort of the test case for this because right head coach, right hits from the transfer portal. The transfer portal allows you to do a massive roster overhaul in a very short amount of time. Or if you're a new coach, you can fix some of your needs right away. So those two things we've seen mix well. It generates improvement. You mentioned Arizona in there too, like Brent Brennan, not a great first year, but the portal bringing in a lot of new faces, change the coaching staff. Like you can start to chart a path forward. Also, I would think in the Big 12, we talked about the parity, the week to week chaos in this league. if you're pretty good on the margins, it might be the difference between 4-8 and 7-5. So you could steal a game or two. And I think this is where we'll talk more about their personnel, but this is kind of where I would trust like a Rich Rodriguez is to find the edge on the margins to exceed maybe preseason expectations.
And by the way, I didn't even mention the most prominent Big 12 example of this, which is Gary Patterson, very good coach, leaving TCU, and then Sonny Dykes going 12-0 and going to the national championship game in year one on a program that had sort of fallen off under Gary Patterson. So there are examples of this in the modern era since basically 2021 where this can be done. Now, what do West Virginia and Central Florida have in common? Well, they have like 11 quarterbacks trying to win the job. In UCF's case, this is where Arizona has the advantage with Noah Fafita, but everything else is a giant question mark for both these teams. I think UCF has far more questions, which is probably why they're at 16. They basically have like no defined quarterback, no returning starters on defense, no offensive line returning starters. they just have to find everything basically at UCF. West Virginia a little bit better off, but by and large, there's a reason these three teams are picked at the bottom of the league.
100%. So the counter to all this is, yes, West Virginia did win 6 games last year, and they're probably on a little bit more stable footing. I think they have over 70 new players on the roster this year. So if is whatever happened last year with that massive roster overhaul and a coaching change, like how much does last year matter? Probably not a whole lot. But I think just looking at the schedule for West Virginia, I have a hard time finding a game they could be clearly favored in. Now, it may be at UCF. This also gets, I think I trust Rich Rodriguez to maybe find the right answers here. We do know Jaheim White is back at running back. He's one of the Big 12's best running backs. You trust Rich Rodriguez to figure out something offensively. The quarterback situation is a concern. I think Rodriguez will figure it out. Where I have massive concerns for West Virginia, the offensive line. They lost some really good players the last 2 years. It was a concern in the spring. Their defense was bad last year. I think Zach Alley, the Oklahoma defensive coordinator, is a really solid fit here. So I think if there's one team out of this group that exceeds expectations, it's probably West Virginia. Arizona's got the quarterback and Noah Fafita. I do worry about some of the other pieces, line of scrimmage, much like West Virginia. And for UCF, there's a lot of questions here. You mentioned quarterbacks, it's receivers, it's offensive line, it's defense. I also wonder, we kind of got this impression from Big 12 media days. Did Scott Frost learn anything that he needs to change from what happened at Nebraska to UCF? It's less pressure, not at your alma mater, but I do worry about that.
He knew what he was doing at UCF. It didn't work at Nebraska, but it worked at UCF. So he may not need to change what he did at UCF to replicate what he did at UCF.
This is true.
Maybe.
Maybe. That's, well, yeah. Let's just
you weren't inspired. You weren't inspired by Scott Frost talking season.
I'm trying to be careful, tiptoe around the internet chatter about maybe why things didn't work out at Nebraska. I'm just saying, I hope that
I gotcha. Hot Frost summer.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. But they really, UCF is just littered with questions with the, like you said, the quarterbacks and some of the other personnel things. They do get West Virginia and Oklahoma State at home. So if you're looking for team that could escape the basement, there's 2 games that they could be favored in. Also, like some of the pieces on their defensive line, Malachi Lawrence, Nijak Kelly, 2 guys on our all Big 12 team. So the roster's not completely lacking talent here. I think maybe the question out of WVU, Arizona, and UCF is these teams could put it together on offense. If Fafita lost his buddy T-Mac to the to the NFL, West Virginia and UCF have good systems. UCF have good systems on offense with the coaching staff. So we'll see how fast they can hit.
All right, let's go to the top here. Kansas State is our pick to win the entire conference. Again, as I mentioned, they finished 8th last year in this league, but they have won 8 games 4 years in a row. They have 5 returning starters, excellent yards per play on defense last year, maybe the best front 7 in the entire conference. And, of course, my boy under center, Avery Johnson, who will have a little bit of work to do with an offensive line, but has a lot of pieces back around him as well. This is a consistency bet. This is a little bit of talent with trusting the culture, with trusting the quarterback, with a schedule that's not it's not perfect. It's not easy. None of these schedules are easy, but you can see a path for Kansas State, and I just think they have a chance to be the best overall football team. Is that 7-2 again with three other teams tied at first place? Is 9-0 even a possibility for anyone in this league? I don't know about that, but I think the safest bet is Kansas State.
I do too. And I think one of the reasons why, I think there's two big reasons why I like Kansas State to win the Big 12 this year. I think number one is growth by Avery Johnson. And at the margins in this conference, they're tight. I think he can go from a pretty solid starter. And I think we'll see what Matt Wells does as the offensive coordinator now. I think there's a chance that his game goes to the next level, which helps Kansas State go from like 5-4 in conference play to 7-2. The second thing is stability. I think we talk about trust factor a lot in these team previews with all the turnover in the portal. Chris Kleiman and the staff, rock solid, talent development, reloading. We know they're going to be good on defense. I know they got some new faces on the offensive line, but it's almost like you just give them the benefit of the doubt. That backfield with Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards is going to be a nightmare for the rest of the Big 12. So I think that's why we have the belief that Kansas State is going to win the conference is Johnson and Kleiman, that combo overcoming a schedule that does include road trips to Utah and Kansas and Baylor and the opener against Iowa State in Ireland.
I mean, listen to those four teams on the road. Those are all four top 7 teams. Almost all of them have eyes on a Big 12 championship. So it's even in a year where the schedule's quote unquote sets up, still 4 critical games away from home for Kansas State. Over 3,300 yards total for Avery Johnson last year. He had over 600 yards rushing, which is the sort of the thing you want to maybe see him reduce a little bit this year. He learned that he could go to that, I think, as the season went along, in a situation where maybe he wasn't as comfortable throwing the football. That is more rushing yards than any other quarterback coming back in this conference. He is 4th in total offense coming back in this league because Shedeur Sanders and Retzlaff will not be around, of course. And so it's a bet on the quarterback. It's a bet on the culture. It's a bet on talent. Again, if I said this is the best front 7 in the Big 12, would you argue with that?
No, I would agree with that. I think, Austin Romaine, one of their linebackers, one of our preseason All-Americans, think this defensive line's pretty salty. Utah, of course, will always have something to say about that. But by far, I think Kansas State, Utah, throw Arizona State in there too. We'll see about Texas Tech. They're going to have much better defensive front, but those are the ones at the top of the conference.
Yeah, look, one of the best coaches, probably the best quarterback, and probably the best front 7. That's a pretty good recipe to be the front runner for the conference. So Kansas State, number 1. Is there a game that you have circled that you think matters more to this team's chances at a playoff spot than any other? I mean, is it Iowa State right out of the gate and Farmageddon up in? Is Farmageddon called something different in Ireland? Like, I don't know.
That's a good question. That game against
Farmageddon famine? I don't know.
the game against Utah in November could be a Big 12 preview. Maybe the answer is that first game of the season, though, because you're kind of setting the tone right away. Because if they win that game, North Dakota, Army, Arizona, UCF, before you get to Baylor at the midway point of the season. So I kind of think with all these teams, given the turnover and personnel changes every team has, if you could check off a big win in week 1 or week 0, then by midseason, you're rounding into form.
Yep, no question about it. Number 2 on our list, the defending champs, Arizona State. And nationally, these two teams are right next to each other, so not a lot separating these two. Sam Leavitt returns, star wide receiver. Jordan Dyson, one of the best quarterback wide receiver tandems in all of college football. Most importantly, even though Cam Scadaboo is not back, 4 offensive line returning starters, which is huge in an era where everyone's portaling everything, and a lot of returning talent on the defense. It is on one of the higher rated from an efficiency standpoint defensive teams in the conference last year. Is there anybody that returns more returning starters like in the Big 12 than Arizona State? It feels like they have a lot in a year where we did our Group of 5 preview last week, and there are teams that have like 1 total returning starter on both sides of the ball combined.
I am double checking just my notes to be sure here, but I believe that is correct. Like they returned the most returning starters in the Big 12. I think the challenge for Arizona State is going to be they are no longer the hunter, they are the hunted. And I think in a conference where they won, I think 6 games by 1 score last year, it is going to be hard to replicate close game victories. Now, saying all that, they probably have the best 2 deep, the best starting lineup on paper in the Big 12 this year. You mentioned Sam Levitt, Jordan Tyson. I like the offensive line. I think the defense for Arizona State being overlooked a little bit. 9 starters back. They've got each level of the defense is going to be solid. Once again, when we talk about which team's going to have the best defense, we talked Kansas State. I still think Arizona State ought to be in that discussion too. From a schedule standpoint, at Baylor, at Utah, and at Iowa State, some tough road games in there. I don't think any team in this conference is probably going to run the table. I think you're looking at a lot of like 7-2s
right.
at the top of the conference. So I think on one hand, Arizona State's probably the best setup going into the year, but also given how clustered this conference is, I think it's going to be hard for any team to repeat back to back.
Well, you talked about the hunter and the hunted, which I think is really interesting psychologically for Arizona State. And I went back and just now looked, and I'd forgotten they lost that Cincinnati game in the
Without
middle
Sam Levitt, yeah.
in the middle of the year. But they lose to Texas Tech, which is sort of foreshadowing what we're about to talk about this year. But they were not ranked. Arizona State was not ranked itself until November 23rd, after it had beaten Kansas State on the road by 10, and they had lost. I think they started 5-2. So they themselves were not. People were not like, oh, we got to get up for Arizona State. Certainly, coaches looking at film look at the talent and go, man, how do we stop Cam Scatterby, et cetera, et cetera. But they were not a team like. They did feast on a lot of bad teams in that schedule when they went before they beat Utah, I guess, who at the time was ranked, but that turned out to be sort of also not real. But they beat Kansas State and BYU at the end of the year. Then they destroy Arizona to get to the Big 12 championship game. That's the first time they were really ranked, and they didn't even get to the top 10 until they were playing Texas. So they definitely were riding on sort of like being anonymous to some degree on the national conversation. And how much does that matter this year? We'll see because they're top 15 preseason team and number 2 in this list for a reason. So let's see how Levitt and Tyson handle the and reminder, of course, Tyson was not playing in that playoff game. That was a very close game.
Yeah.
So.
It's funny. We talked about Arizona State here, and you mentioned his name, but I actually think Scattleboo is going to be missed. I think from a leadership, and also from a sort of the kind of enthusiasm that he brought to the program, the way he carried himself, and the team fed off of that. I think that's going to be missed, but I think from a rushing production, I think they can actually replace it with the guys. But still, we go back to this conference, and you look at like Arizona State winning 6 games by 1 score. You look at what BYU did in close games last year, 4 wins. Iowa State 5. Arizona State also, they had a weakness at picking up a kicker last year, and they got one from Eastern Michigan and Jesus Gomez, who's going to be pretty good for them. So they did address one of their big needs to the portal. But again, I think how they handle close games and going from where they were in year 1 to year 2, what's the next step for this program given the personnel? Because on paper, they might have the best setup in the conference.
It's hard to believe that the first time Arizona State was ranked higher than its opponent last year was the Territorial Cup in the season finale.
Yeah, that is surprising.
It's the first time they were ranked higher than their opponent, which is fascinating for a team that won the Big 12 championship and really, really should have won the game against Texas. So
they could have also lost to Texas State in September 12th too. So
hey, that's good. That's an excellent Pac-12 team. Number 3 on our list, Texas Tech. And here's my thought about Texas Tech. Like I'll let you break down all the strengths and weaknesses here. We know the offensive line was terrible. Here's the thing. They were 6-3 last year. They had a really up and down first month of the season, obviously, with how they played. But they were 6-3 last year. And I think if you are a program in this conference, this is the right time to do the thing that they're doing. Like you were close, but not close enough last year. You were 6-3. You've got a quarterback coming back. You got a coach who knows how to sort of like kind of build this Texas culture thing. You got boosters, you got a big alumni base, and you're in a league where a little bit of money probably goes a long way. Money goes a lot further in the Big 12 than it does in the SEC or the Big 10. And so I'm looking at this strategy going like, I have no idea if they can portal 5 offensive linemen and be better. I don't know. We're going to see. But as far as strategies go, this is one of the most ideal times to do what they're doing. It's why Ole Miss tried it last year, because you got the quarterback, you've got some talent, you got some experience last year, you played well down the stretch, you got 6 wins in the conference, and a little bit of money in the Big 12 goes a long way. I think it's the right time to do this. I have no idea if it's going to work or not. But with number 3, Texas Tech.
Why not? Right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
Why not? Like your Texas Tech, you can recruit probably one of the top in the top half of the conference. We talked about margins. If you're willing to spend, you can go out and get the handful of players that you need to hopefully go from here to here, which is good enough to make the playoff. And you mentioned it, they were 6-3 in the Big 12 last year. You can say they were close to winning the conference or close to playing for the conference title. You can also look and say they beat
Abilene
Oklahoma
Christian.
Right. They barely beat Abilene Christian. They beat Oklahoma State by 8. They beat Iowa State by 1 and Cincinnati by 3. They had 6 victories by 1 score. So they were on the margins. They have tried to improve the margins. What I like they did about Texas Tech, they did the most. Defense has been a long running issue in Lubbock. So they went out.
Hey, can I give you some numbers on
Yeah,
that?
go for it.
So they start 5-1, even though it was a little wonky there. They gave up 59 to Baylor in a loss, 35 to TCU in a loss, 41 to Colorado in a loss, 48 to Oak State in a win, a winless Oklahoma State team, and 39 in a loss to Arkansas, all in the last half of the season.
Yeah, so fixing that defense was a priority.
Whew.
So they got Sheil Wood from Houston, who did a great job last year. Houston's defense was a strength, despite the offense keeping them on the field for too long. Second thing is they went out and got people who can get after the quarterback in the portal. This is David Bailey from Stanford. This is Romello Height from Georgia Tech, and they brought in Lee Hunter from UCF who can stop the run. So their defensive line should be much better. They've got good linebackers. They brought in some dudes in the secondary. If they're just middle of the pack in the Big 12, that is a significant step forward. On the other side of the ball, you brought up the offensive line. They brought in a handful of transfers there. It's probably going to be better. I also think Baron Morton has to stay healthy. He has been banged up consistently the last couple of years. He's got to stay healthy. They're going to miss Taj Brooks. I think they'll probably be fine at running back. So I think for me, for Texas Tech, is how far does the defense progress? Can Baron Morton stay healthy and take the next step? And the road schedule at Utah, at Kansas State, at Arizona State, and then I think by November 29th, when they play West Virginia will be a lot better, and it's in Morgantown. So I think that schedule is really tricky for Texas Tech trying to take that next step.
And by all accounts, the shoulder surgery in the offseason for Morton seems to not necessarily be a factor for now, but you never know about those things. Shoulder surgery for a quarterback, always a thing you have in the back of your mind, for sure. So, look, I think it's the right time to try it. I don't, again, I have no clue if the offensive line is fixed. I have no clue if spending like this works. I think it will have a better chance of working in the Big 12, as I've already said. So, number 3, Texas Tech. Number 4, Iowa State's like the opposite of Texas Tech. It's like the complete polar opposite strategically, which is we're going to let the culture do the work here. Let the culture do the development. Let the culture do the talking. And honestly, if Iowa State does get back to the Big 12 championship game at number 4, I think it will be because of the Matt Campbell, Jim Heacock sort of culture thing that they've built. Because the defense wasn't particularly great. It wasn't sort of like a vintage Iowa State defense. They've got some good pieces coming back in the front 7. The secondary is where Iowa State has traditionally been able to develop lots of talent. They take 2 and 3 stars and turn them into NFL draft picks at safety and corner all the time. Obviously, you got Rocco Beck back, but he's got to replace 2 NFL receivers in Knoll and Higgins. To me, 11 wins last year, most in school history, top 15 ranking at the end of the year, only the second time in Iowa State history. Can they replicate that? Sort of the same questions I was asking about like Missouri a couple years ago. It's like, can they replicate that? And if they do, to me, it is a total credit to the culture and the coaching staff that has been there for a decade now, Stephen.
On one hand, I think you trust Iowa State. There's I think a pretty significant trust factor in Matt Campbell and John Heacock, like you said. Their defense.
Did I say Jim again? I do that every single time.
Oh, don't worry. I couldn't. I get Drew and Zach quarterbacks mixed up for North Texas on our Group of Five preview.
Is
So
isn't Jim Heacock? Isn't that like an Ohio State coordinator?
yeah, he was like there under Tressel. So yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
John Heacock. I'm sorry.
Yeah. The Iowa State defense was not as good as we're traditionally used to seeing, but that was largely due to injuries. They had a ton of injuries at linebacker last year. I think you and I were on the depth chart in the season finale at some point at linebacker, which was bad news
That's bad.
for Iowa State's defense. But I think you again trust factor in this coaching staff. They will figure this out. Offensively, think Rocco Becht and they got an experienced offensive line come back. They're probably going to be fine. The receiver turnover is a little bit of a concern. But I think on the other side of things, coming off the most wins in school history, 5 wins by 1 score, they seem like a little bit of a regression
Yeah.
candidate there. Not much, but I could see them taking a step back. Now, if you want to make the other argument that they're not, they get Arizona State at home and they get Iowa at home. It's a huge rivalry game, obviously. They play Kansas State, of course, in Ireland. So our Big 12 favorite, they get them in the season opener, neutral site. They get Arizona State, the number 2 team in our rankings, at home late in the season, where the weather's probably going to be a factor. In Iowa, that's a pretty favorable path for Iowa State to try to get back to the Big 12 championship game and potentially win it this time.
I am really trying not to let my just overt love and appreciation for Iowa State shade my judgment here, because last year I feel like we were right to be like my Cyclones, even though I don't think you were with me on that until the end. I was like Iowa State to the Big 12 championship game like kind of early last year.
Yeah,
I
you were right.
I don't want to let that love of this program and their culture and everything like shade the fact that I agree with your regression point. When you win that many times with 1 score, you lose NFL talent. Defense wasn't great. Like I think a historic season is very hard to replicate at programs like Iowa State. It just is. It just is. That's just a point of fact. So I think we're right to have them as a clear cut Big 12 championship game contender. But I think I think at the highest I could convince myself to put them as 3rd. I don't think I can put them ahead of Kansas State or Arizona State.
Yeah,
I think
I was going to say Iowa State was 15th in the Big 12 last year against the run. Very uncharacteristic, which, again, gets at the injuries at linebacker. I just want to give a shout out to 335-pound force Dominic Orange on the defensive line, a guy who will not accumulate a lot of stats, but if you watch Iowa State play, he takes up a lot of space on the interior and is very fun to watch.
Number 5 on the list, and I do think that the 2 championship teams in this conference come from the top 5. I think there's a line here with the top 5. Baylor at number 5. Now remember, these guys won the championship under Dave Aranda in 2021, a few years ago. They started the season last year 2-4. They played all their good teams early in the season. They lost to Utah, BYU, Iowa State, and Colorado all early in the year last year. And at 2-4 last season, they were 11-20 since their championship in the Big 12. 11-20. That is, I'm about to get fired territory for Dave Aranda. They turn it around. They go 6 straight wins. They bring back a bunch of talent on defense. Sawyer Robertson sort of found a groove at quarterback. You and I have talked a lot about him. Threw a bunch of touchdown passes down the stretch. Now, I will say, they beat Texas Tech on the road, which is a nice W. They beat TCU at home, but only by 3. And they beat Kansas by a lot when Kansas was actually playing its best at the end of the year. But otherwise, Houston, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, they didn't beat that 6-game winning streak is impressive. They didn't beat a single ranked team, and they beat, other than Kansas kind of playing really well down the stretch, they didn't beat anybody playing its best football. So how real was the end of last season in your opinion? We will find out, by the way, against Auburn in week 1, but how real are you buying? I mean, it seems like you are buying into this as well with them at number 5 in the conference.
I am buying Baylor. I think you could also look at that Kansas game last year and say, did Kansas just run out of steam? Because like they beat Colorado, they beat Iowa State. They may have just ran out of steam at the end of the season. Also, speaking of Colorado, what if Baylor knocks down a Hail Mary and beats Colorado? They're 7-2 at the end of the year.
True.
We're talking maybe different tiebreakers and how that all worked out. So they were right there in the margins of potentially playing for the Big 12 championship. I do buy this team for a couple reasons. Number one, their schedule. They get Arizona State, they get Kansas State, they get Utah at home. We talk about margins. They're getting 3 of the top best teams coming to Waco. They also get Auburn in Waco. It's a good year to be a season ticket holder for the Baylor Bears. Offensively,
Chip and Joanna got a lot of good football to watch.
That's true. The Sawyer Robertson led offense, what they did last year under Jake Spavital, I think they can kind of replicate that in year two, build on that. There is a bit of a question about one of their top receivers and eligibility, Ashton Hawkins. Not sure if he was on the team, not sure if that he's going to be eligible this year, so that could be a loss. But they also bring back 4 starters on the offensive line. They got 5 starters back on defense, a defense that needs to improve. But, we talk about trust factor. I think you kind of believe that Dave Aranda is going to be able to work this out. So I think what's interesting, too, about Baylor has kind of been the change that we've seen. I mean, they were wearing the shirts that say, like, what we pay players. Dave Aranda's invested in the portal. Like, I think Aranda's a culture guy. I think he'd prefer to build to the high school ranks, but I think he's been pretty adaptable, whether it's roster building, coaching staff, schematically, whatever it is. And I think as a result of that, with the quarterbacks, with Sawyer Robertson and some of the firepower. By the way, running back Bryson Washington, probably one of the Big 12's most underrated players. They can score, and if their defense is better,
Yeah.
with those teams coming to Waco, they have a chance to get to the Big 12 championship game.
If you take the Tarleton State game out, where they scored 45 points in week 1, the first half of the season, where they went 1-4, again, not counting Tarleton State, they averaged 24 points a game. In their 6-game winning streak, they averaged 41 points a game. They were putting up big numbers on offense in that stretch. So I'm with you. I'm buying Baylor. I think Aranda has to fix the defense, as you've alluded to, but I think there's a lot to like on the offensive side of the ball. You mentioned all the stuff coming back around Sawyer Robertson. I think there's a lot to like about this team. I think I think I've got them at 5 as well. I like them better than the next few teams we're about to talk about. I don't think they're as good as the 4 above them, but I do think. How do you feel about the statement of it? The 2 teams from the championship game are probably coming from this top 5. I think there's a line of demarcation after the top 5. Is that fair, or are you?
Let's talk about the next team.
All right, you're gonna put Utah in there. Okay, number 6, Utah. Obviously, they're doing the Diego Pavia, Jerry Kill, New Mexico State, John Mateer, Ben Arbuckle, Oklahoma strategy, which is let's go get a quarterback and his coordinator to come from New Mexico. They go get Devin Dampier, who rushed for over 1,000 yards last year as a quarterback, very dynamic player. Jason Beck is the coordinator. They've got a bunch of new pieces around him, but line of scrimmage and trench warfare on both sides, generally pretty predictable and good for Utah. They do lose their defensive they do. Their defense is in very, very good shape. They've got a veteran on every level of the defense as well. I was reading the wrong notes there about the defensive coordinator. But
he's the head coach in waiting. Yeah, Morgan
he's
Scalley,
the head coach
right.
in waiting. I think the defense. I think the things you trust about Utah, packaged with the big time adjustment and strategy on offense, I think there's a lot of upside here. I don't know. I mean, like, you know me, I love Whittingham. I trust the guy unequivocally, but this is a big ask to go from 2-7 to competing for a Big 12 championship game. Don't you think?
Arizona State last year might have something to say about that.
Touche.
So let me convince you. So we have Utah picked 6th on the website. I actually, if you ask me today, I would move them up even more. And maybe it's because I'm drinking the Utah Kool-Aid off of Big 12 Media Days and everybody seems to be getting like some positive Utah vibes here. If you ask me tomorrow, my predicted order of finish in the Big 12 might change. That's kind of the way this conference goes. We talked about close games. Arizona State benefited from it. Some others did. BYU did too. Utah was, I think, 1-5 in 1-score games last year. And they were decimated at quarterback. I mean, Cam Rising, Isaac Wilson, Brandon Rose, like they had so many injuries at this position. So despite all of that craziness going on offense, they had a lot of close games. Their defense was still second in the Big 12 in points allowed. So their defense, despite being on the field a lot, was still elite. They do have some personnel turnover, but I think when you start kind of breaking down the sort of like meat and potatoes of this team, 2 tackles who are going to be picked high in the NFL draft on offense, and they got a couple holes to fill on defense. I think we trust Kyle Whittingham.
Yeah.
And you're telling me they're going to be much better on offense? I think this is a team that not only can get to the Big 12 championship game, I think they can win the conference.
So top 6 then is what I should change my story here. By the way, I just pulled up my gambling app of choice. Kansas State plus 550, Arizona State plus 550 to win the conference. Number 3, Utah at plus 600. Basically even money with those top 2. Vegas is telling you something right there, or at least all the gamblers around the Big 12 are telling you something. Texas Tech plus 650, Baylor plus 700, Iowa State at plus 1200 behind TCU at 7th. That is good. That's a good savvy value bet right there. I might play a Baylor Iowa State bracket
I
deal
like.
on the championship. Get some
I
good
think
odds on those two.
I think I'm gonna take
Take a
a
stab at it.
flyer on Utah and Iowa State in that group. Yeah.
Yeah, plus 600. I mean,
Yeah.
third for Utah. So no doubt
Yeah.
that the Vegas odds and media days and look, you ain't got to sell me on Kyle Whittingham. So I hear you. So keep an eye on Utah. Keep an eye on Utah. 7 is Kansas. I do. Do you agree with me that I don't like this is where it starts to get into all these teams are basically the same and that there's it's probably not championship caliber but very good teams that are going to cause a lot of problems. Kansas, of course, Jalen Daniels very rusty at the beginning of last season. He is plays really good football down the stretch. They go 4-2. They beat Iowa State, Colorado, and BYU. Offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes is in Madtown now. They lost their longtime defensive coordinator as well, Brian Borland, who retired. They went portaling as well. What do we make of Kansas at number 7?
Also due to bounce back this year. So they were also 1-5 in close games. And so I think if you just think about that in the big picture, the offense, especially at the start of the season with Jalen Daniels being rusty, they had some problems with turnovers, maybe the staff didn't mesh. That should be in the past this year. Daniels appears to be 100% and back to his normal dynamic self. So they had trouble with the close games last year. If Daniels is healthy, that's probably a couple checks on the margins. Also, we talked about trust factor with Kyle Whittingham. I trust Lance Leipold. I think they will be back at least in a bowl game, potentially more. Do have more personnel questions here. A lot of new faces at receiver, defensively, new faces at linebacker and
Yep.
secondary through the portal. It feels like there are more concerns here than with Utah, but I think if Daniels is good and the OC combo of Zabrowski and Lubbock end up working out, I think Kansas can be in the mix in November to be in the Big 12 championship game. And they host Kansas State and Utah later in the season, which is pretty nice for their hopes.
Honestly, Jalen Daniels' first half performance last year is one of those moments that reminds you about sports and that you're just like, you can feel like you've got a great sense of what's going to happen and that a team looks good on paper or that this player has a track record and like you can do all that stuff. And every now and then it just doesn't work or it works way better than you expect. And there's like Arizona State, there's reasons it worked, right? Like Cam Scadaboo was a force. They found a quarterback in Levitt. They had a star receiver. The defense was good. Dillingham was selling a something that everyone was bought into. Like there's reasons we can see after the fact that it was working. It's like I look at Jalen Daniels and I'm like, okay, fine. He was breaking in a new coordinator at the beginning of last season. But other than that, it doesn't really make any sense. Some of the throws he was making last year. And it's like, what are we doing?
I wonder how bad the back injury was from 2023.
Sure.
That might have been worse than we knew. That's really the only thing I could think of. But to your point, some of the throws early in the season, I'm thinking this isn't the Jalen
Doesn't
Daniels
make
that we
sense.
saw from like preseason all
Yeah.
Big 12 status.
All right, number 8 on the list, TCU, one of the more interesting teams in this entire conference because they have a star quarterback in Josh Hoover, has the most, I think he comes back as the most efficient and productive passer in the conference. They were 6-1 down the stretch. This is a coach who has been to a national championship game. They cannot run the football. That's a problem. but Andy Avalos, the defensive coordinator, showed progress last year on the defense. Statistically, they got better. They got some starters coming back. I think they have 6 returning starters on defense. So there's a lot to like about this team. Hoover does not have Jack Besh or Savion Williams, both going to be playing on Sundays, much like Iowa State. They both feel like they have guys to replace those 4 names, but you don't just take Besh and Savion Williams off a roster and just not miss a single beat. So I think they're gonna have to find some names early. But honestly, I could make the case for TCU to be higher on the list right now.
I could too. Couple things of interest for me for TCU. It's sort of what path do you believe they were on at the end of the year? Because you can look at their end of the season schedule. They beat Utah, great win in Salt Lake City. We know the problems Utah had last year. They beat Texas Tech by a point. They lost to Baylor, close. They also beat Oklahoma State, Arizona, and Cincinnati in that stretch and Louisiana in the bowl game.
You know how hard it is to play an entire season of college football and not beat or lose to a ranked team the entire year?
Yeah,
You
right.
know how hard that is to do?
Yes.
They didn't play a single ranked team, which means they didn't lose or win against anybody. That's wild to me.
They're
Ranked at the time, I should say,
right because they play SMU. They played earlier in the season, but what I'm getting at is
where they gave up 66 points.
right. It's like almost like what do you believe? Is like was
Yeah.
that the start of a turnaround again back into Big 12 title contention, or was it beating up on a pretty bad schedule and some favorable matchups? I like Josh Hoover. I think with Josh Hoover and a defense that there is a lot of optimism in Fort Worth this offseason about the progression of Andy Avalos in this defense. If those two things work out early in the season, they get Arizona State and Kansas State. They're on the road, but they're early. They get Iowa State at home and they play BYU on the road late. So their top games are kind of split. It's almost like if you can survive those first two, and even if you can get a split, if you lose both, maybe second half you can make the run. You get to 7-2, you're in the mix to play for the Big 12 championship. But I think you said it best. They got to have more balance on offense. They got to get better on defense still, and also filling in some of those offensive line receiver spots here. I think you can talk yourself into liking TCU more, especially if Josh Hoover continues to progress like we think he will this year.
I might have them at 7, but I don't think I can put them above Utah. But I might have them at 7 if I had to do it over again when training camp starts. But they're 8 right now, which brings us to number 9, BYU, who is the only team really that has made a big change since we put out the magazine because of Jake Retzlaff being removed from the roster. So, what was your decision making on sort of how much he was valued at this team? We've talked a lot about that issue. This was right where BYU was at this time last year, and they found a guy who was very good. So I'm not saying they're going to find it again. They did win a lot of close games. They've got a sort of they've got some solid skill position players like almost every BYU roster will have. It's not quite a service academy, but it's got some service academy vibes when it comes to the depth chart. The offensive line is going to be reworked as well. And look, they don't have a lot of starters returning on defense, but it was the best defense basically in the conference last year. So there's stuff to like, but there's also a lot of big holes that they got to fill.
I think that was BYU is one of my teams I was surprised was consistently getting projected in the top 10 and the top 15 by some people earlier this offseason. Now, differences in rankings are good. We can talk
Sure.
about them and we can figure them out. But I was surprised given the three victories in Big 12 play by one score, also 29 forced turnovers. That's hard to replicate from year to year. So it felt like they were a good regression candidate. Their schedule is pretty favorable. And that's something I took into account when we did the magazine. But I think moving them back is if you thought they were going to regress already and now you're taking away a starting quarterback, um, I
Yeah.
think they're moving to the back of the line in this group of like 9 teams that we thought maybe if at the start of spring practice was a Big 12 title contender. I don't think everything on BYU this year was about Jake Retzlaff. I think it's more about the team. And I think if I was a BYU fan, that would give me confidence that says, yeah, we're losing our starting quarterback, but maybe we run the ball better with LJ Martin. The defense under Jay Hill and Sataki, they continue to plug and play, and they're at the top of the conference. So I don't think they're necessarily going to fall off, but I think they were due to regress already. And if you take away your starting quarterback, you're
Right.
probably closer to like 7-5, 8-4. I think the win total has already dipped to like 6.5 at some places.
I, I,
Uh, that
I
seems
think
about
7. I think 7 wins would be a pretty good year.
yeah.
I
I do
think
too.
for BYU. And ninth place in this conference is, to your point, like again, Kansas State was 8th last year. They're a pretty good team. So, all right, number 10 is Colorado, and here's my question with Colorado: can you make a change and transition from elite level top end talent to sort of foundational talent? And I don't know if Deion Sanders even wants to do that. I hope he does. I would assume that he does because he started this process with elite top end generational talent, his son, and of course, Travis Hunter, more so Travis Hunter. But they have to eventually fill out the roster with good players everywhere. And I think they've started to do that, but I don't know. What do you make of like transitioning from top end to foundational as a year that they probably are not going to replicate their 9-win season this year as they did last year?
I think the question that I've wrestled with this offseason is what's the second act at Colorado look
Yeah.
like? because it's not football is a team game, but man, Sanders and Hunter were so valuable to that team. Now, full credit to Dion because they are significantly better. They are much more nationally relevant. They are just coming off a 9-win season. So I don't think they're necessarily going to just completely fall back to like 2-10, 1-11, like we saw a few years ago. But I do think there is going to be a kind of a recycling process here. And as you brought up, like the roster retention, the roster transfers, like they've done Jordan Seaton, one of their freshmen they have brought in. He's an All-American at offensive line. So they have been winning some battles in the traditional high school ranks. But again, here comes another heavy transfer class. Guys like Hayden Salter, Joseph Williams at receiver. How does that quarterback battle shake out?
Yeah.
Can you get the game-changing ability that Hunter is leaving? Is that made up? We should give
I mean,
also some
he might be a once in a generational talent. So
right. It is going to
hard
be
to replace that.
very difficult to replace that. Also, full credit to Robert Livingston on defense. Less than 24 points a game last year in Big 12 play for Colorado's defense. And they got a lot of dudes like Jaheim Otis, Arden Walker, guys who are highly touted coming out of high school. They bounced around in transfers. So I think their defense could actually take another potentially step forward, but the offense is probably due to regress here. And I think there's a line for me. We talked about TCU, BYU. I think there's a line here. I would be pretty surprised if Colorado or
Yeah.
any other team in
Yeah.
the ranking gets to the Big 12 championship game.
I agree. Number 11 is Houston. This is all about how good the offense, how many steps forward can the offense take under Willie Fritz in year 2. They tend to do very well in his second season at a school, but they've got basically a new quarterback, a new offensive line, new skill position players, new coordinator, new everything on offense. They also are replacing Sheil Wood, who you mentioned went to Texas Tech, but the defense was not the problem last year. They're in really good shape on that side, and I trust Willie Fritz to do the job. This is just about culture building and sort of the next big step. I think 4-8 last year. If they get to 6 wins, they get to a bowl game or 7. I think it's a clear statement of Willie Fritz's ability to just continue to slowly build a program, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think they're going to mess up some seasons, though. Is how I feel about Houston. They may not have a great year, but they're going to mess up somebody else's great year.
I agree with you. I am going to take Houston to get to a bowl game. I think they find a way to get to 6 victories. Defensively, they do lose quite a bit. 4 starters back. They lost their defensive coordinator, Austin Armstrong, who was at Florida, is now calling the plays.
Is he 30 years old yet?
Right.
Keep going.
It's fine. It's a fine hire. Offensively, though, is what I like out of this team. And going out and getting Slade Nagel, who was Willie Fritz's OC back at Tulane. They're getting the band back together. Connor Wigman, ultra talented, didn't work out at Texas A&M. Probably bounce back candidate. They fixed the offensive line through the portal. So Houston's offense was a huge question. It's going to be better. I think they'll be solid again on defense. I just trust Willie Fritz to do the things at the margins. So give me Houston to be one of the most improved teams in the Big 12 this year.
Totally agree. Cincinnati at number 12. They went from 3-9 to 5-7 last year, so some mild improvement, but that might not be enough to save Scott Satterfield's job. Of course, they did find a quarterback in Brendan Sorsby who was solid last year, not great but solid. They had a new defensive coordinator in Tyson Vate last year. This will be year 2 under him. I don't know what the upside is here, and I don't know what Scott Satterfield needs to prove to keep the job. If they don't get to a bowl game again, I have a hard time thinking that he is back next year.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think Cincinnati. It's Cincinnati's like every team in this conference. Is you should make a bowl game every year. Like that's a pretty reasonable expectation. Not every team in the Big 12 can make a bowl game, but I think you're right about Brendan Sorsby. If Cincinnati gets to a bowl game, it's because Brendan Sorsby takes that step forward. They went very heavy into the portal to find answers at receiver, offensive line, and the secondary. So there's a lot of personnel turnover, but it might be overcome by having Sorsby back. Let me also direct you to the schedule because they play Oklahoma State, they play UCF, and they play Arizona. 3 of the teams at the bottom of the conference. So if you're trying to get to a bowl game, you get 3 of the easier teams in the conference on your conference slate there.
Keep an eye on Cincinnati. I do think they need to get to a bowl game for him to save his job, for sure.
Agreed.
That brings us to last but not least, not in the standings, but in this conversation, Oklahoma State, number 13. Look, is there a more tired collection of coaches than Mike Gundy, Doug Meacham, and Todd Grantham?
It was cool back in like 2010? Like,
2012,
right,
yeah, like would have been a really good staff in 2012.
right.
I like it's a totally the good news I guess is it's a totally blank canvas on offense. Um, there are a couple of starters back, but I don't trust Grantham to not blitz on third down. So, what do you like? What happens at Oklahoma State? Like this could be an entire podcast, but what happens at Oklahoma State this year?
Honestly, I have no idea what to make of this team. Um, I'm not joking about this. On my notes that I took for the magazine on each team, the first line on Oklahoma State I have is, "Who the heck knows?" Because last year they went from preseason favorite to 0-9 in the Big 12 and 3-9 overall. You wonder a little bit if it's the last stand for Mike Gundy, because if it doesn't work out this year, you're probably cycling over the roster again. He took a pay cut, so there's a lot of signs there that there's a lot of pressure. I think if you wanted to believe that this team is going to be better, they brought in, I think, over 40 transfers. They've got new coordinators. It's basically a new two deep. It is a fresh start. There's some reasons to be optimistic on defense about the personnel. Offensively, I don't know. Who's going to be the go-to receiver, offensive line, quarterback? I don't know. If you think this team is much better, it's just that Mike Gundy does Mike Gundy things, and Oklahoma State finds a way to get to 6 wins and kind of exceeds expectations. I think they will be better. I just don't know if it's like 6 wins or is it 5 wins, or are we talking about a new coach there at Oklahoma State next year? They're a very hard team to figure out with all the changes.
I don't know I don't think Oklahoma State knows what it wants. Like the power structure. I don't know if they're like, do we make a change from Gundy? Do we keep Gundy? Do we give him a chance to fix it? Like I don't know if they know. I don't know if he knows, but it's going to be interesting to watch either way. So there you go. 13th Oklahoma State, 14th West Virginia, 15 Arizona, 16 UCF. All right, let me ask you this to wrap up the conversation here. Please buy a magazine, athlonsports.com. Here's last year's magazine, and I've got last year's for a reason. Go buy this year's magazine. Keep it. It's on newsstands. It's on the internet. You can buy it on athlonsports.com. You can watch us on YouTube, and you can listen to us on a podcast app of choice. Rate, review, subscribe. 5 stars. Okay. Iowa State was 7th. Arizona State was 13th. They played in the Big 12 championship game. You have to pick two teams like that are going to play in the Big 12 championship game. And don't just pick like Texas Tech and Iowa State because they're 3 and 4 in your rankings. But if you're not picking Kansas State or Arizona State, in light of number 7 and 13 playing in the championship game last year, give me the matchup you think this conference could deliver. And if you pick Texas Tech and Iowa State, I'm like, oh, that's just your rankings. I'm gonna scold you.
I just looked at the predictions in this year's magazine, and 7 and 13 is Utah and Oklahoma State. It's like the perfect rebound year after what happened last season. So I would
that would be a horrendous uniform game, for the record. The helmet matchup is terrible.
I love Utah's uniforms, but yeah,
I do too.
That would not be a mix.
Orange and red do not go well together.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a good mix. How about Utah versus Baylor?
That's what I was going to pick.
Yeah,
I was going to pick Utah versus Baylor.
That would be my
nice
sleeper Big 12 championship game.
How about TCU Baylor?
Mm-hmm.
That could be good.
That could be really good.
That could be interesting. Iowa State Utah, also not a great helmet rivalry matchup, but we'll see. Texas Tech Utah is just a lot of black and red on the field. Baylor Utah would be a good helmet matchup. I feel like good uniform game, good defenses. Yeah. That would be a good green and red. That's a good combo right there. I like that. As long as neither of them wears a bunch of black. So, all right, Steven, anything else you'd like to say? Parting shots of wisdom around the Big 12?
Like I said at the top, I think this is the toughest power conference to predict, 1 through 9, 10, 11, and even at the back half of the conference. But I also think that this conference is going to deliver another awesome season of football. Yeah, so I cannot wait. I love the mix of coaches, quarterbacks, all that. Even if the coaches are soft and ending the league's preseason rankings, so because they got their feelings hurt about
Oh,
Arizona
it's
State.
such
But
big babies. We should have talked about that earlier. I love the quarterbacks in this league. I don't think they're as talented as some of the NFL prospects in the SEC, but these are really good quarterbacks, and there's going to be a lot of really good quarterback matchups every single Saturday. So I agree with you. It's probably the most entertaining and most unpredictable and most dramatic football league we're going to have all season this year. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll see if they can get a second team into the playoff this time. So we shall see. Always a pleasure, my guy. Special thanks to all of you out there listening. Give us some reviews. Write only good things, 5 stars only. Otherwise, watch us on the YouTube as well. There, thumbs up, notifications turned on. Go buy a magazine also. For Steven, I am Braden. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. We'll talk to you next time.